February 22nd, 2017, Tesla presented their 2016 fourth quarter financial results as well as year-end 2016 financial results. And along with those financial documents and information, they released forward-looking statements into 2017, including things that relate to the Model 3. Additionally, after their official release in document form, there was a Q&A session for those in the financial world. So not fans, not media, but financial brokers and from a select group. So many of the questions in the Q&A were not necessarily what we as future Model 3 owners want to hear, but Model 3 production and revenue is a huge part of Tesla's financial picture moving forward. So certainly Model 3 questions did come up. So this video takes you through two stages. The first half is going to be statements taken directly from their published documentation surrounding the 2017 outlook for the company. The second half of this is quotes or at least paraphrased quotes from Elon that came out of the press conference, again focusing only on those that were related to the Model 3, not the press conference itself. No financial information, nothing about Solar City or any of the power walls or anything like that. I have tried to keep this focused on Model 3 information. So one of the first quotes that came out was the Model 3 is on track for initial production in July and volume production in September. And we'll have some numbers behind that here in just a minute. And then later, some additional numbers that changes the math a little bit. But it was great to hear right out of the gate that they are on track. They remain committed to the timeline that they have been talking about from the beginning for the Model 3, which is production in July, and then ramping that up through the remainder of the year. And so speaking of that ramp, so 5,000 vehicles per week at some point in the fourth quarter of 2017, and 10,000 vehicles per week, again, at some point in 2018. So at this point, when this was released, this was all that was there. Elon was asked about this, or at least brought it up. So we'll get to that in just a few slides. But based on this information alone, let's look at some quick math. Conservative math, in my opinion, sort of giving them credit for maybe not the beginning of the month hitting some of those ramp-up numbers, but if they stay on track, you're looking at 25 to 35,000 Model 3s in 2017. Again, I think that's conservative. I think that number probably would be more towards the top end of that if you think in terms of 1,000 vehicles per week right out of the gate, and then ramping that up by the end of the year, being at 5,000. But conservatively speaking, a decent number in 2017. Again, we'll revisit this math with something Elon said later in this presentation, which I think we'll like a lot better. So again, sticking with sort of that formula, by mid-2018, that would mean 160,000 Model 3s would have been produced. Now, when Tesla speaks in terms of production numbers, they are talking about the full line, X, S, and Model 3, but the Model 3s will be the majority of the vehicles, at least in 2017 and 2018. And this number does take that into account. So by that math, that is not blowing away expectations. But if you extrapolate that out and give them credit for a 10,000 per week production in the second half of the year, then all of a sudden you're looking at over 400,000 by the end of 2018. So what that tells me is that if you place an order for a Model 3, or a reservation rather, for a Model 3 in 2016, you will get it in 2018, barring problems. Now, that's easy to say, and that was a big part of the conversation, and some of the quotes we have from Elon is, the production of the Model 3 is very aggressive, and if they can meet those goals, then I believe that what I just said is absolutely true. If you placed your reservation in 2018, or in 2016, you will get your car in 2018. A lot of things have to go right, but Tesla feels like they're in a position to have all of those things go right. All right, so crash test results initially have been positive, and they continue to be, again, on pace for production in July. That is a consistent story throughout their publication and a consistent story throughout the press conference as well. So, and this is underway, right? This is starting to happen. Installation of Model 3 manufacturing equipment is underway in Fremont. So we've heard that from the beginning, that this was the week they were starting to turn the factory over to start producing Model 3s, at least on a limited test run here in early 2017, and that's all still just on track for production models to start rolling off in July. So, they're going to have a lot more vehicles out there. So they've come out and said that they're absolutely expanding everything, right? So more superchargers, more retail locations, and more service functions. I think it's interesting that they chose the word function rather than service center. I don't know if I have a slide on it or not specific to this, but Elon does mention some of the simpler self-service elements on a Tesla that can be done still by a trained service technician, but that can be done remotely, so they can send people to you at your home or office rather than having you come into the service center. So service functions, I think, alludes to that a little bit as well, and that's something they're working on building out, sending people to you to do small tweaks and adjustments that need to be done on your car. All right, so that was some key text from the initial press release that accompanied the data and the numbers for Tesla Motors in 2016. And then following that was a press conference that featured Elon, and press conference isn't the right word, it was a Q&A by the financial community, as I mentioned. So many questions were focused on the financials, but of course, a part of that is the Model 3 and how it's progressing. So I have these kind of positioned as quotes. Some of this is paraphrasing. It was happening quickly. I was trying to make these notes as we went. But some interesting things came out of that Q&A session. Probably nothing super groundbreaking or changing what we know. Some of it was reaffirmation of what we already knew, and there was some new information, I think. So the big theme of the questionings early on was around, how are you going to get to these levels you keep talking about? 5,000, then 10,000 cars a week. How are you going to get to that level? And so the next series of quotes sort of speak to that. And the first one is the Model 3 is designed for manufacturing. So they knew they were going to be ramping up production when it came to the Model 3. And so they designed the Model 3 to be manufactured efficiently and quickly. And that was part of the explanation of how are we going to get to scale when we've never done that before. Well, part of the reason is by design, these cars are more easily manufactured than what we've done in the past. An example of that, and he gives a couple of them here, the Model 3 has one screen. The Model S and the Model X have two screens, and the computer powers each of them. So, again, sort of simple explanation. Well, that's easier to manufacture. Now, this has brought up quite quickly a conversation around what does the interior of the Model 3 look like? Elon's spaceship comment from several months ago is still on people's minds. The initial test rides in Model 3s at the reveal event or showed just the 15-inch screen. Is that all there's going to be? One could interpret this comment as exactly that it's only going to be that 15-inch screen. There's been a lot of conversation around a heads-up display. So some people interpret this as, well, there's not going to be a heads-up display because there's already one screen. They're not going to get rid of that. They have to have a touch screen. My thought on that is a heads-up display technically a screen? Or is it simply projected up in front of you, not necessarily on a screen? So technically, this does, in my opinion, does not take heads-up display out of the equation. In fact, one could interpret it as very much putting it into the equation because it's not technically a screen like you think of with the big 15-inch touchscreen or the sort of behind the steering wheel screen that exists in the current Model X and Model S. But the point was, this is a simpler car. and that's why we will get to scale manufacturing them. Another example of that 1.5 versus 3 kilometers of wiring. The S and the X have twice as much wiring due to size, due to some of the things that they did differently when they manufactured those cars compared to what they're going to do now. There's less bells and whistles on the Model 3, right? I mean, it's a lower end car compared to the current S and X, and maybe some people don't want to hear that, but that's reality, something that we should have all known. And self-presenting door handles and falcon wings are hard to produce. That's why the Model X was so late, is those darn falcon wing doors were really hard to manufacture effectively and with high quality, not to mention doing it quickly. So it's just a simpler design process, and this all sort of rolls back to that initial statement that the Model 3 was designed for manufacturing. This is a big point as well here. So Elon was very clear to say that, look, when we built the Model X and the Model S, we had a really hard time getting suppliers to work with us. They didn't think we'd stay in business. They didn't think we had any money. They just wasn't worth it to them for the small production that we were doing on the Model X and the Model S. Well, now we have a proven model. We have a huge number of orders already in place. So now, not only are we getting the best suppliers who absolutely know that we're going to be around for the long haul and this is going to be a very good relationship for them to enter into, we're getting the A team from those suppliers. He even said something to the effect of, we've gone from getting the B team at the lower tier suppliers to the A team at the tier 1 suppliers. So it's a big factor that maybe people hadn't thought about. Look, the entire process is getting better, including one of the biggest weakness points previously, which is with the suppliers. Elon said multiple times, you're only as strong as the weakest point along your process, and for Tesla, that has been their suppliers. And hopefully that is changing, and that will be a big factor as to why the Model 3 will stay on time. And going down still that road of, hey, how can you produce so many more cars? You've produced about 125,000 in your lifetime. You're telling us you're going to produce 1 million a year by 2020 and 500,000 in 2018. How can you possibly do that? And again, we've been talking about that to this point, but look, the Model 3 production just has more automation, and the Gigafactory is a huge asset. And that is I said some of this is paraphrasing. That is a direct quote. The Gigafactory is just for the batteries alone is a huge win for Tesla, and just having a better control over that entire process is how they're getting to scale. And again, that's why Tesla and Elon feel so confident that the Model 3 will be on time. So someone did bring up the Model 3 configuration. When will that open? Well, again, these are not media members. These are maybe not the savviest folks when it comes to asking questions in this particular vein, but they made it a two-part question around the unions as well as the Model 3 configuration. And so Elon certainly addressed the union portion of the question and then sort of just stopped. And the broker or the analyst did not follow up with, hey, I also asked you about the configuration. So we did not get an answer yet. We didn't have an answer yet. So then someone did ask about the number of orders. Much better question, very well phrased. Didn't give them an out on it at all, but they didn't want to answer it. So we are still in great shape on Model 3 orders was sort of the message. And they said they don't report that number because people read too much into it. So it is still a big mystery. There was some conversation around some of the detailed numbers on the line items in terms of reserved revenue for cars. They said that was not due to Model 3 people dropping off, that in fact it was sort of some high-end Model X vehicles that got delivered in 2016, so that dropped off that revenue because they were delivered. They were no longer part of reserved revenue. So I don't know how truthful that was. I'm sure it was not a lie by any means, but maybe a gray area. But as Elon has said before, we are anti-selling the Model 3. People come in looking for Model 3s. We try to sell them Model S's and X's. So they're not concerned about the number that they have to produce and the number of reservations that are on there. I wonder if this speaks to the fact that there has been some attrition and they maybe did not want that headline out there, even though some attrition is certainly expected, potentially significant attrition with the time and the process that we're talking about, but they didn't talk about those numbers. All right, so this is where it got real interesting, and this was, I don't want to say unprompted because there was a question that came up ahead of this, but it was still sort of around this concept of ramping up and how are you going to get to these numbers and can you really deliver 10,000 cars a week by middle of next year. And Elon said, looks like we've told our suppliers that we plan on producing 1,000 cars a week in July, 2,000 a week in August, 4,000 a week in September. And that was very telling. So that sort of defined a little bit better that initial statement from the initial publication in terms of what that ramp up looks like. Now, he did make a very good point and talk a lot about this, that, again, going back to we're only as strong as our weakest point. If 1% of suppliers are even a day late, that throws everything out of whack. And that's how tenuous some of this is in terms of getting to these production numbers. And he said, he made the comment, he said, if I knew who that 1% was right now, I would rectify the situation and I would find somebody else. Obviously, he doesn't know who that is. He doesn't know what supplier may end up stumbling just a little bit. And they even mentioned that sometimes that's out of their control. It's a little bit unlucky. Potentially, there's weather factors, earthquakes, who knows, any number of reasons that things can happen, but it doesn't take much to disrupt a pretty aggressive timeline. So it was sort of a little bit of a warning, right? That we're being optimistic today and everybody's thinking about great numbers, but hey, it's teetering. There's a very small margin for error. And there's a lot of moving parts, no pun intended. But let's stay optimistic now for a minute. So let's look at 1,000 cars a week in July, 2,000 a week in August, 4,000 a week in September, right? So that's more quick math. So we had 25 to 35,000 on the slide earlier. Of Model 3s in 2017. If you use that math, it's more like 88,000 by the end of 2017. I think we all like that much better. And so if we then use that same math and we're at 5,000 for the first 6 months of 2018, we're at 218,000 cars, 218,000 Model 3s by mid 2018. And again, if that ramp up curve sort of continues in the second half of 2018, we're talking about 10,000 cars a week again, then now you're talking about 478,000 cars by the end of 2018, and that most certainly gets it to everybody that's ordered one, even to this point, quite frankly, I believe. So again, some numbers out there. It's still several months away from being reality for sure, and it's very aggressive, but I think there's a lot of optimism that by the end of 2018, everybody who's ordered a car as of now, as of February 2017, is going to get their Model 3. A lot can still happen, of course, but I think that's a realistic expectation, and I think a lot of people are talking about, 2019, 2020 before you're going to get your cars. I don't think that's ever been true. Obviously, there's a lot of reason for pessimism. Certainly, their track record would say that something's going to go wrong and there's going to be a problem, but a lot of talk by Elon today of, look, we have a better process, we're better at this, that's why it's going to work. And there's no reason not to believe that. So, the initial Model 3s will go to employees. I think we've always known that. And part of that is simply because that's a good feedback group. Those are people that are familiar with Tesla. They will be asked to provide their feedback, and they will because it's the part of their job. And so the question was sort of around the final version. When can we see the final version? And this was perhaps the most disappointing part of anything that came out, was at least a few months, maybe not even until July itself. That's when we'll show you a final version. And then Elon did go on to say it'll be pretty close to what I've showed already, right? What you've already seen. And then he kind of sort of said, well, no, it'll be better, be a little better. And then he kind of worked his way into, well, it'll be a lot better. So a little bit contrary within that one sentence is, well, it'll be pretty close to what you saw, but it'll be a lot better. Not sure those things necessarily make sense, but I think we've all known that sweeping changes are in the past, right? It's too late. There's going to be certainly a lot of tweaking and minor adjustments and updates. But I think what we've seen is what we're going to get for the most part. Things that we haven't seen yet still sort of remain to the imagination, and we'll learn more about those, but perhaps not until much later in the year than I think some people were hoping. So again, people revisiting the question on production numbers, and he says, yeah, absolutely, we can do 5,000 vehicles, 500,000 vehicles in total next year. So it's not all Model 3s, but he has said recently that they want to up their goal to 500,000, 500,000 cars in 2018, and he still felt like that was the most likely outcome. And he was very careful to not emphatically state that it would happen. For sure, he did use the phrase "the most likely outcome" a couple of different times, and then he went on to say a couple of more years to 1,000,000 units. So he has also said in the past 1,000,000 units by 2020, and he stuck to that today. Again, didn't pound his fist on the table and guarantee it or anything like that. He did choose his words carefully, but he still feels very confident that the ramp up is going to go smoothly and that they're going to get to the levels that they expect to get to. All right, so again, we talked about the question of configuration. Someone, much to their credit, came right out and asked it. Hey, they even said, it was asked earlier, and I'm not sure we got an answer. When will configuration of the Model 3 be available? And he sort of stumbled over talking about it'll be open to, internally for Tesla employees first, which we sort of expected that. It'll work out the bugs. It'll help, again, a feedback group. But he said, look, it's probably going to be pretty close to production. So we're probably 3 or 4 months away. 4 months from now is the end of June, and if they're starting production in July, that makes sense for the first folks that have signed up. So I think people were really hoping to hear more about configurations and different options and models and things, and there was no talk whatsoever about another reveal. And so again, that probably the two things that were most disappointing today. No big announcement about the date for the next reveal. No big talk about it. In fact, if anything, it sounded like it got delayed. I think a lot of people were thinking that would be, and for good reason, Elon kind of said it would be 3 or 4 months, and that was back in December. And clearly I shouldn't say clearly, it certainly didn't sound like today that is coming in the next couple of months. It sounds more like that will be probably tied into some of the production models starting to roll, quite honestly. So we'll see. We'll see what happens there. But a little bit disappointing probably that we didn't get more details. Maybe unfair to expect it, but certainly something we would have loved to have gotten and did not. And so then he really started talking about, in terms of financial implications of the Model 3 and the investment that was going to take. There was some conversation around cash flow and cash outlay and needing to raise more capital ahead of the Model 3. And he came out and said that we don't need to put any more money into design, and we really don't need to put any more money into production. We're there with that. What we need to do, and what we are doing, is we need to streamline the delivery process. We are delivering a lot more cars than we've ever delivered before, but we can't just open 3 to 4 more time service centers. That doesn't make sense. It's not practical. It's not cost effective. So we have to streamline delivery, and I referenced that a little bit earlier in terms of how much of that delivery can be done by a trained technician that is mobile, that is in a Tesla van or maybe a Model X service vehicle, something like that comes to you, comes to your office, comes to your home, does the smaller service or the smaller repairs or adjustments, whatever may be needed at your place. They're making it a lot easier, and that also cuts down the need for service centers, obviously, which are a little bit different to outfit by a long stride of just sort of outfitting mobile options. So, all right, so deep breath. There it is. Clear as mud, I hope. Information is going to continue to roll out. There's going to be different interpretations of what we heard today for sure. It's all part of the speculation. Maybe say it's all part of the fun of being early adopters on the Model 3 and getting those reservations in and sort of wondering and being excited and waiting for it. I think absolutely the great news that came out today was that they're on track. They feel like they're on track. They feel like they're going to really be able to ramp up and really be able to hit some impressive production numbers by next year. And I think on the flip side, the disappointment was no information about configuration, no information about options, things like that. Which, again, I think is unrealistic to expect that in this forum. I think we got a lot more than maybe we should have, considering that it was an earnings call. But forward-looking statements are certainly part of that, and we did get a little bit of new information. So take a look in the description of this video. There's some links to some other videos that I've done, some eye candy on the Model 3, and then a video that is now a little bit outdated, but a little bit more depth on what we know about the Model 3. So it doesn't cover the stuff that was brand new today. Sort of covers everything over the course of about 11 months from reveal to early January, where a lot of things have come out, a lot of good sources on that too, if you want to learn even more. Appreciate you watching, and like everybody else, just waiting for more information, and as it becomes available, I'll try to update a new video.